Hello.
Hello.
It's so great to be here. My hope is to talk for like 15 minutes and then just engage in dialogue. So when Julia asked me to come speak, I began to think of what actually do we want to say about the sharing economy? Because for me, the sharing economy, the story of this was the new narrative, the new story, the new economic story for the country and the world. If you'd asked me in 2012, like what was I incredibly hopeful about in terms of a story for how we could live or figure out how our culture can actually adapt to the new economic and resource realities that we see, the people on the planet, I would have told you that the sharing economy was that story. 5 years later, I'm perplexed. Excited on one hand because the scale in some ways is much greater than any one of us would have dreamed of at the pace and scale if we were talking about this 5 years ago. On the other hand, the righteousness of that story, that sense that it was progressive and just and worked for everyone, not just the richest among us, that's really called to question right now. So we're at this sort of perplexing moment. And we titled this Beyond Sharing because I think it's not that we need to get beyond this very simple old idea of potlatch, of giving, of sharing that is so human, but we need to figure out a way to transmogrify or change or adapt the framework of sharing and the sharing economy as it's been defined today. So with that as sort of the content, if that's okay, I'm going to take you back a little bit, tell you how I got here, and then share just some insights of what I'm seeing here, and we'll sort of go from there. Sound all right? Yeah. Okay, so I come to this as a environmental activist. This is a Mexican walking fish, or an axolotl, one of the most incredible species on the planet. There's about, biologists say, between 700 and 1,200 of these left on the planet, mostly in 3 Mexican lakes. And they're absolutely incredible creatures. They have these neotenous features so that when they're underwater and let's say an arm gets caught in a rock and an arm comes off, the arm will regenerate, which is kind of incredible. And it's actually the only creature we've ever found that if its heart is injured, the heart will regenerate. So they're being studied for application in surgery and cardiac efforts. And it's just an incredible looking creature. And so from a very young age, I was struck by creatures like this by the natural world and really asked the question, what do we need to do to save it? So, through the 90s, I actually started as a sort of a land protection activist. I grew up in Southern California, and as a kid, I used to go around to Joshua Tree and Death Valley National Monument at the time, East Mojave, and just make maps. Like go on weekends and just map places that were that I hadn't seen, that people hadn't really seen much, and put those maps together. And after about 15 years, in 1994, we passed a bill called the California Desert Protection Act, which created Joshua Tree National Park and Death Valley National Park and all these big national parks, which felt like the solution. Like, hey, Death Valley's protected forever, until climate change came around. Because climate change, all of a sudden, was something that was, for all of us, and nothing new, right? These were conversations that we had at Stanford 30 years ago, that the things that we knew about climate change 30 years ago were perfectly clear at that time. But the activism that we've been doing bill by bill wasn't working. So I'm one who believes that we need to actually go get arrested. We need to go put our bodies on the line and stop it, because that is actually, this is an action for Keystone-XL, the first time the Sierra Club actually did a arrestable action. And to my mind, that was a kind of an important moment to sort of say, there are some things that have failed. The system of politics and legislation is not working, and we need to actually ramp it up. And around that same time, so now we're kind of in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, something else happened, which was we kind of gained a president, and President Barack Obama, who seemed to want to do all the right things, but we lost all the air in terms of the enthusiasm to do something about it. And that's why political action or extra legal action like civil disobedience was necessary. But before that, I spent a bunch of time working with Walmart because this was during the time of the George W. Bush administration, where it was absolutely clear that we couldn't actually move things forward through legislation or through the EPA or kind of the traditional tools. So this idea that you could actually work with a large company and it could actually legislate just by making good decisions for its business seemed to hold a lot of favor for me. This was the best-selling forks in the world. They sold billions of these everyday value forks. And what we found at Walmart was that there were two different things to do. The most important one was just to get people excited about what sustainability was and that it was something that they could actually be involved in. And we developed a process that we called PSP, or Personal Sustainability Practice, and worked with over 2 million Walmart associates to help basically build a relationship to sustainability that was personal. The CEO challenged us to say, he wanted to meet people, instead of them sort of saying, you know, how's it going? They wanted to ask, he wanted them to ask him, what's your PSP? Like, what's your personal connection to this corporate goal? And that fled all the way across through the company. And the sort of second piece of that was actually just going back to all the suppliers, the roughly 60,000 suppliers who supply Walmart, basically create all the consumer products on the planet. And an example of forks, one supplier figured out a way to actually pull plastic out of the base of the fork. So there's a kind of a hole in the middle. You might see these actually. They're now sold at Walmart. And it removed about 12% of the plastic in the fork, which is lightweighting it. It was a real simple strategy. It actually made the fork 15% stronger, so it lasted longer. It was sort of a win-win. And we had all these sort of little things. We had boxes getting smaller and toxics coming out of things and all sorts of good changes. But the problem was that in this process, we kept on selling more and more things. So more and more better disposable forks are still disposable forks. And we sort of got stuck in this challenge where there were steps forward, but at scale, it was not actually solving it. And that really, for me, is sort of the investigation that sort of led into the sharing economy. You sort of look across, like, what is the most perfect packaging in the world? A banana, right? And then this is how bananas are packaged now, one place. There's another part of consumerism, which is this desire to have more and more incremental features instead of actually doing something actually new. This is a 6-bladed shaver. And for any of you who use shavers like this, it's like, there's actually shaving cream inside the handle too. It's really, really important convenience. But there's sort of something sort of fundamentally wrong when people are trying to get pleasure out of these tiny incremental innovations that really aren't doing much for that business. That's not Gillette. That's some company trying to copy Gillette. They're not making millions of dollars, but they are wasting millions of pounds of resources. And a lot of our innovation looks like these sort of 6-bladed razor or 7-bladed razor or 8-bladed razor now. If you want to see all these, you can actually see them in Sky Mall magazine. I kind of love that. This is a woman wearing a slanket. Okay, so what we used to call this, in the easiest way, was linear economy, take, make, waste, this idea of you own it, planned obsolescence, this idea, these concepts, which I assume that you're all kind of familiar with. And the idea, of course, is moved to a circular economy where we look at values like access over ownership, looking at services over items, and look at lifetime customer value. So you actually have a relationship with the people who you are selling things to, rather than just sort of say, you take it, go away, and whatever happens to you, I don't really care about. That might be the H&M way of dealing with things. And that simple idea, like, let's get out of this business of making better plastic disposable forks. Let's figure out a way to make things that have lots of life, was sort of the birthplace of Yerdle, based on one other insight, which is how are things changing? This is a TV dinner, actually quite a big TV dinner. Picture I found of it. But the TV dinner, to my mind, is sort of the kind of best example of what 20th century innovation looked like. The TV dinner was created by a guy named Jerry Thomas in 1954 for the Swanson's Company. It's a restaurant supply company that had never made a consumer product before or anything that they sold to consumers. And one Thanksgiving in 1954, they bought too many turkeys. Tons and tons and tons of too many turkeys. And they didn't know what to do with them, so they put them in refrigerated rail cars and started spinning them around the country. Just like all the way across, because that was the cheapest way they could store them. So you can imagine sort of a ghost train full of dead turkeys crossing through the United States. And they sort of figured at some point, like, someone would buy them, and like Christmas came and no one bought them. So you can imagine kind of these like pained board meetings, like, what do you do with the turkeys? I don't know. Maybe a January turkey holiday, I don't know. And to this problem, this extra turkey bounty, came this insight from this salesman, Jerry Thomas, that he remembered using these sort of mess trays in the military and was sort of seeing them on his Pan Am flights at that time. And he was also sort of putting together this new freezing technology that Clarence Birdseye had recently invented. And he put it together with a new technology that was peaking, which was television. People were like, this was the period where like people would stand in lines at stores on the streets and look at television. And he created the TV dinner. The TV dinner, initially with that turkey, sold 10 million units in its first year, which is big, right? 10 million units in the 1950s was a lot. It sold 300 million within 3 years. It just blew up, this idea of putting all these things together. And that's that sort of context that I know you must talk about a lot here, but this sort of change in society, which is not just television, but post-World War II, 8 million women who had stayed in the workforce and needed help preparing meals. A change in technology, that freezing technology from Clarence Birdseye, and again, television. And then a change in resources, which is, free turkey. And, in some ways, the 20th century innovation was based on this free resource. There's just lots of coal and lots of turkey and lots of stuff, and we need to innovate based on that. And as we know, the 21st century is not going to be a story of free resources. It's going to be a story of constrained resources, resources that actually are harder to get to. And that's actually the driver for some of this type of innovation. There's a cultural piece too, and for me this sort of came really right at heart in India. This is Dharavi, one of the world's largest slums. It's about 1 million people living right in the heart of Mumbai. And you can sort of look at the waste and refuse, but you sort of miss the bigger story there, which is that it's an incredible hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. And one thing that really exists is what they call saving circles, which don't just exist here in India, but about 60 million women across the world participate in some version of saving circles. And for me, there's a sort of great inspiration for the type of sharing model or the story that I shared with you before that could really work. So the model of a saving circle is very simple. And there's 3 rules that pretty much every one of them in these 60 million folks follow, which the first is save every day. So there's a real behavioral cue to it, but you have to do it every day. And typically what happens is sort of one block captain, and she walks around and takes a little bit, a few rupees, a tiny amount of money from each person, but collects it every day. Second, survey your community. Really know data about your community. And their belief is that they should know better than Facebook, better than the government, what's happening and what's happening on your block. That everyone should know how much money everyone makes, how much money they have in the bank, what their health is, how many kids they have. The information should actually be held by the neighborhood, and there's really good community. And the third part is this really belief in spreading the word. And the reason why there's so many of these saving circles is because they have spread organically based on this idea. So every time you kind of form this one unit, it then sets out other units and grows. And to my mind, that's just a great model for how we can actually grow something. This is Sheila Patel from Slum Dwellers International, and she was here sort of just pointing out how you could, one of the adjunct parts of this particular saving circle was stuff. This is a set of dishes for a wedding and jeans. And basically people brought on Sundays these together, so there was one set of wedding banquet set of dishes for the community instead of having lots and lots in everyone's garage. It would be here. So again, I'm sort of showing you these things as sort of points that lead us towards getting to the sharing economy. Add to that the amount of stuff. Now we're sort of moving back into the United States. Self-storage in the United States has grown by about 1,000% in the last 30 years. It is extraordinarily large. The average American, the stuff in an average American's home is used roughly 15% of the time. So about 85% of the things that you have in your home are used less than once a year, which is kind of incredible. And we're watching this sort of growth of things. I calculated recently that there are now 63 Legos for every man, woman, and child on the planet. And in some ways, if you like Legos, that's great, right? Like lots of Legos, but they're just poorly distributed. and a lot of them are sitting in places like this so that kids can't play with them. The United States has something like 4% of the world's children and buys about 40% of the world's toys, which is cool for US kids, but they're largely stored in places like this again. And there's sort of a dark side of all this stuff too. In the most recent set of diagnoses by the American Psychological Association, they added hoarding as a clinical diagnosis. And there's a context called oniomania, or over-shopping, a shopping disease. And psychologists estimate that this is somewhere between 5 and 10% of Americans who suffer from a clinically diagnosable hoarding disorder. So it's not like a small thing on the side. This is a pretty significant part. And it's a range, of course, right? So it's a spectrum. So those are folks who are clinically diagnosable, who actually cannot live their lives normally, successfully, because of the stuff that's holding them down, or their need to shop, or their need to take care of the things they already own. And then all of us, to some extent, have some form of this. If you think about the amount of time that you spend taking care of things or working to get things that you may not necessarily need, that may not necessarily make you happy, there's a connection between them all. For me, this looks like this. This is a coffee maker I got for my wedding from my friend Shepard. It came up with this thing that said ERR2, which I Googled, and it said, when it says ERR2, you must throw away your coffee maker. I was like, okay. There's a wonderful organization called IFixit, which I highly recommend, which actually will tell you and is trying to actually create codecs so you can repair everything, even something as useless as this. So I really struggled with this, and I actually didn't drink coffee for a while because I really love this coffee maker. My friend got it for me. It was really emotional to me. And then my friend Kevin came over, and he actually had an extra coffee maker, so he just brought it over, and I used that. And the reason I give the story is that there is so much abundance. It's faster than Amazon. It was cheaper than Amazon. I enjoy it more because it came from Kevin. So there is a lot of stuff. Our challenge is actually getting it from place to place. And that was really the kind of the insight behind Yerdle. And Yerdle started with a very simple mission of trying to reduce the number of new things we all have to buy by 25%. And it started out of this really glorious idea of just sharing and doing it as a technology company, but building that way. So it started as a website where we asked people to post extra things they have, and then get something for that. We set it up a currency so we could disintermediate and asynchronously pass things between it. So if you post a book, you could say it was worth 10 credits, and you just name it what you want. And if I get that book, I have to give you 10 credits, and then you earn 10 credits, and you can spend it on something else. And over the next year and a half, about 1 million things passed between about 700,000 people. And they were just mailing them back and forth. We took a small service fee. It was an interesting model. But what we found at the same time was, first of all, we could move bikes really easily. We could move things like pasta makers, which are really, kind of fun, but you don't really use them all the time. And we found that, first of all, we got tons and tons of printers. This is the most useless piece of junk you could possibly imagine. But what we found was that Patagonia, who had been an initial investor in our company, their items were kind of taking off and sort of building a life of their own. And we kind of found ourselves that the greatest need for us was actually to focus on kind of the back end to help companies that already exist to move their products back and forth. So we now operate the Warrenware store for Patagonia, which looks sort of like this. And it's pretty simple, actually. If you just go onto their site, you can buy things that are used, and they're factory certified and excellent. And we're doing that for REI and Eileen Fisher and a bunch of other brands who are interested in kind of keeping a relationship with their stuff and moving forward, which is great. It's a good business model. It's a growing company. It's all really good things. But to my mind, it didn't actually answer that scale question, right? So we, of course, need to do more of that, and I don't mean to not act excitedly about that, but it's a piece. The bigger challenge is how do we actually get to working at the scale of the challenges that we deal with. If we actually look at ourselves as living on a planet that will have 10 billion people by the end of the century, how are we actually working at solutions that are at that scale? And some of the things we've seen, recently, like Uber or the protest against Uber, and this is Berlin. Airbnb or the protest against Airbnb. They seem to challenge the narrative part of this, which again, if I start by saying the solution to scale problems is a new story, a new economic story that says that we all can participate, we have enough for all of us, and we have to figure out how that actually gets distributed, how we can use technology and culture to do that. The challenge here, and I have to apologize for leaving this as an unresolved challenge to you, but the challenge here is how do we get that back? Is it the sharing economy? Is it the belief that the Ubers of the world are going to do that Airbnb is, or is it a more networked one? Is it one where we see lots of small solutions, places like individual companies and brands like Patagonia, or large companies like Walmart, linking together and doing it? What's the role of civil society in pushing it? Because we've had all these, again, now 5 years into this experiment, we have some giants, and they're wonderful companies, all who are trying to figure this out. And we have governments, meanwhile, trying to figure out what they regulate. So that was my goal today, was to sort of tee up and share with you the journey that I have to get to here, and then to begin a conversation about it. Because the truth is, we don't know. We really don't know. So with that, I'll just shut up and we can talk. Good? Okay. Oh, good. Do you want this?
No, I'm going to plug it back in.
Okay.
What'd you do with the cord?
Thoughts? I don't know what I did. Questions? Challenges? Please. You're actually studying this, yes?
Yeah, I'm studying it. Yeah, it's a problem. The issue, I mean, people use the term the sharing economy, and companies like Uber and Airbnb and so on profess to be sharing, but when you look at them, they're really not. That may be a very small part of their business model, but in essence, that's a smokescreen. Or maybe it was an original idea that seemed to be really good, but it didn't make as much money for anybody as far as other activities did, and so they moved. So the question is, of course, well, should we call out those companies and say, you know, there is no sharing in this, so please stop calling yourself sharing economy, or should we take it a different way? I mean, the way you're going is really an interesting way. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about as well, so I'll leave that thought there. So what do we call these companies? Is it just a naming issue, and people are claiming to be something that they're not? And why would they do that? Well, I think that they would do that because they're transforming markets by challenging regulations, and by claiming to be sharing, then they get popular support, and so they have some popular support for that sharing. So the question is, well, where do we go from here with sharing economy?
Okay.
A question from a governmental perspective, economic growth is one of the most important things to get votes. And Yerdle, does that add to our GDP? And if no, then how can we work at that level to try to get some other metrics that will, that the population can engage with and be motivated by? Because GDP, I agree with you, from a resource perspective, it's not going to actually get us what we want, which is, or what we tend to think people want, which is happiness. Utility is very different from money. And I mean, what do you have you worked in that space, or have you thought in that space?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is the new economic story that we have to get to, and there's some on both sides. So on the, let's just say that the leftier side of the political world, all growth is anathema to good. That my mentor was a guy by the name of David Brower. He was the first executive director of the Sierra Club, and he used to say that growth for the sake of growth is the philosophy of cancer, which I think was a pretty good summation of people's feelings towards this idea that we constantly need to grow more and be more and do more, etc. But at the same time, and this would be the other side I would sort of really conquer and say, look, by the year 2100 there'll be 10 billion people on the planet. Today there's already, 3 or 4 billion people tonight who will go home and sleep in conditions that do not have enough resources to support them. That don't have heat, don't have electricity, don't have an adequate shelter in there, or don't have adequate foodstuffs. So we obviously need to bring all of them into the economy, and to do that, the economy is going to have to grow a lot to actually support it. It's not just a redistribution of what we have; it's actually a bigger economy to get there, including people into it. So it's this balance between the two. Now the question you asked is, do reuse programs like what Yerdle does, are those productive or not? Do they add to GDP? And to some marginal sense, yes, but actually, most of the transactions on eBay, for example, don't, count to GDP. And those of us who sort of believe that we need to move from gross domestic product to gross domestic productivity, where we're actually looking at things. So the old saw is if you take a laptop that's in your drawer and you give it to a kid who then figures out how to get her master's degree with that thing, that you did nothing for the economy. Whereas if you got into a car accident on the way to her house, that would actually be stimulative because you'd have to pay for a hospital bill and buy a new car. So there are some weird ways that we do it. To my mind, when you make the productivity argument, it really works. I mean, we employ a lot of people at Yerdle, sorting and moving things back and forth, stuff that was just sort of sitting in a closet. And if you go to public storage units, there's one right near my house. I live in the Mission in San Francisco. It's a public storage unit. It used to be the Wonder Bread factory in San Francisco. It's a huge old brick building. It's on Potrero, kind of near Division. You'll see it's huge. It's literally I think it's like 6 or 8 acres of land right in the middle of the city. And over 1,000 people used to work in that building. And now it's just this weird public storage ghost town. Maybe 3 people run the entire facility. And if you think about getting jobs into that, people actually refitting clothes, remaking things and getting them out, there's actually real jobs there that will actually be stimulative. So complicated, but I really think pushing back on the no growth, can't have any growth is important from a justice standpoint too. Please.
I think that's a very good insight. I would love to hear from you a little bit more about your experience at Yerdle and what you particularly experimented and found out about payment or non-payment. I know you run different protocols there and had a kind of a pivot and even introducing currency then. I think that would be very interesting for the group here and all of us to embrace further the sharing economy.
Yeah. So Yerdle started out as a complete gift economy. Where you would just give it and get social benefit from it. So if I gave you this remote, it would get reflected higher in my social status, and that would make it easier for me to get the next thing because I gave something. And you sort of see this in eBay rankings and pieces. We found that for our first adopters, that worked really well. Because people just didn't actually want to have sort of like with your family or deep friends, you don't want to actually have a deep, who pays for dinner tonight? Well, you got it this time, I'll get it next time. It sort of works out. And people were very comfortable with that. As we got bigger, let's say 100,000 members, we couldn't actually hold that anymore. And we needed something to have a currency that actually we sort of hit a plateau. We were sort of watching it grow and then it sort of calmed down. And people were coming in with 2 behaviors that were challenged. One was they were taking things off and selling them on eBay, which the existing community really hated. We didn't because we thought, actually, the goal is here to move things out. And the biggest thing about separating from stuff is that people have these sort of irrational emotional attachments to things that yes, someone gave it to you, but you don't need it, so get rid of it. Just pass it on, don't have it. And we found that a currency at that point really worked. And the goal here was we called it credits, and we tried to make it, we had a little yellow dot for it. And we didn't price it, we just sort of said, you decide what it's worth. So you could decide if this is worth 10 credits to you, great. If it's worth 100 credits to you, great. And what we found is pretty sophisticated buyers kept it very, very liquid because they were using eBay as a way to off-sell or other ways to take things off and off-sell them. So they knew that they could trade certain things for a lot of credits and other things not, and they were just playing the market against each other, which kept it very, very liquid. So the items were moving just fast, and what we found was that having a process like that also allowed membership acquisition to happen really quickly. Because you could come in, we could give you free credits, we could issue the currency ourselves. So you basically say, come in and get anything you want on the system for the cost of shipping. It's a pretty good offer, so people came in and bought a lot of stuff. So currency worked really well. We just eventually hit a point where to get to customer acquisition to be a size of eBay would have taken so much capital that it felt like that was actually not going to solve the problem. Because meanwhile, we had all these companies who were, well, a few companies at least, who were really using the system and finding that that was really important, and were defining this kind of need for themselves to have these back-end white label solutions to their reuse needs, which we were servicing on the side, and just basically made it kind of a level-headed thing, like let's go raise a lot more money and try to build a consumer product, or let's go focus more on actually servicing a market that's really growing. And so we're doing a lot more volume than we were doing before, and it's growing really fast, and we don't have to do any customer acquisition, which is kind of a pleasure.
But that's really interesting, right? It seems that there's still, in the sharing economy, or particularly for sustainability services, in the B2B world or intercompany, so much more opportunity to implement change at scale, and it's much harder in direct to consumer.
Yes. Yeah, so I love direct to consumer. Like that's my, or customer, voter, whatever it is. That's my passion, is actually getting individuals to take action. So for me, it's a really disappointing solution.
But it was easier to drive a change with plastic fork at Walmart than trying yourself to sell these plastic forks, right?
Yeah, and it's a I mean, I'll just to live in the uncertainty. It's a conundrum. But yeah, right now, and that was my experience in the early 2000s. It was my experience recently. Is that companies actually are way ahead. Companies, governments, they're way ahead of where customers and people are.
Why is that?
That's a really interesting question. So I'm spending most of my time now on politics, and I just read a book by this guy named Mark Lila, who basically says that essentially Reagan began this time of talking about everyone as an individual actor. Right? We're all individuals. We have to master them. And in some ways, on the liberal side, identity politics has done the same thing, where it says that we're all special and individual, and we should act as such. And in both cases, we've sort of lost the sense of the collective, the sense that we're actually all in this together, and that one of the values of citizenship, of living here in the United States, is that we take care of everyone who's here, that no one is left behind, and that belief exists, but it's hard to tap. Really hard to tap, particularly when you're trying to sell things to people, because money puts them into a whole different sense of being. It's a really interesting conversation. Please.
I had a question also about your currency, and I wondered whether at any point in your history has the fact that you've invented your own credits been a barrier to adoption, because I can see a user who has been watching items and kind of shops and gains a knowledge of what does 4 credits really equate to, or what's it worth. If it just said it's $6, I know exactly what that is. So, have there been any adoption issues or sub market segments that you haven't been able to reach because of that currency?
There was, and again, we actually just scrapped the currency completely. So now we don't use it, largely because of issues like that. At some periods in time, so the simple answer is that some people always had trouble with a non-cash currency and how to deal with it. Particularly people who had more money did. People who didn't have a lot of money, which was really the core of our customer base, we found, was that it was people who were really who are smart shoppers, value shoppers, trying to find ways to get by. They're very comfortable playing the numbers, and they love the game part of the fact that they're getting a deal meant a lot to them. So I found that we were playing into that sort of reptilian sales brain of people, and Americans love a deal and love to find a deal and love to hunt it out, and they love to be there, and they'll watch it and they'll hit a button over and over to get it. And when you're running a tech product, that's what you're looking for, right? You're kind of looking for, wow, that's real engagement. There's something that feels hard about it, where you look at it, you're like, wow, that person actually used your app 700 times today, and you go, wow, is that good? I'm not sure I want to actually do that. I mean, it looks good on my numbers, but I'm not sure I really want to do that. So. Yeah, the currency stuff is really fascinating, and we read a couple papers that I can share with you a couple years back that were kind of on that point. Yeah, please.
Is there any effort made by Yerdle to keep the trading somewhat local? Because I mean, if you're shipping a book from Florida to Alaska, is it completely negating any savings by just wasting that much fuel and getting it there?
So we did, and we will do that more and more. One of the, so we actually had, at that initial time we were doing peer-to-peer sharing, we basically had a flat shipping rate. So it was actually in our real interest to have people trade in California as opposed to go from California to New Jersey, because it cost us $1.25 to send a book between California, and it cost us $4 or $5 to send it to New Jersey, and we were flat charging $3.50 so we were really interested in doing that. And the simple answer was, we did it about 15 or 20% of the time, but couldn't get to the scale and the number of items to actually do it every time, which is kind of where Amazon's at, right? It can really get it to you from someone on your block, which is where we actually need to get to go. Oh, please. Julie?
I just wanted to bring us back to the kind of narrative point of, we've developed these narratives for various reasons, but really focusing on the individual and the unique individual and their unique preferences and cultivating those since birth. Do you want the blue cup, sweetie, or the red cup? We actually teach our children that having preferences is great and being a unique individual. And I think you made the earlier point about what's our cultural narrative that will allow us to kind of shift to building a society and orienting ourselves around building the kind of society we want. And just interested, especially because of your background too, in kind of different kinds of storytelling, if you have thoughts about that, and then just sharing an observation that, of course, we have to think globally on this, and that a lot of this individualistic thinking is very Western. And many cultures, more Eastern cultures, focus very much on the collective. And instead of children, trying to learn and develop these unique preferences to define themselves, it's really much more about defining how do you fit into this larger picture, and your satisfaction coming from not realizing your full individual potential and uniqueness, but really realizing your full potential to fit into this broader frame and play your role within that broader frame. And of course, one could analyze the strengths and weaknesses of both and the incredible innovation and entrepreneurship that comes from the American individualism and, et cetera. But I think there's a cultural, perhaps, perspective that's important, and also lessons that can be learned from diverse cultures. And then I think it's a question, how do we rebuild, an American story that suits our uniqueness and all the strengths of the American or, some of the Western stories, but allows us to make this shift to the reality that we are entirely interdependent and that we have to, work with the collective. So I would just love to go a little further with that and hear anyone else's thoughts or hear your perspective.
Yeah, of course.
I think that story.
Part of the collective. This is vexing. And when you have a challenge like I have a company that I want to try to grow, and then you're trying to match that against your value set, and I think I raised this point, selling really works. People's mind, they like to to get a deal. So if you actually play into it, it'll move your numbers up and really do it. And you look at Uber, for example, and from a resource efficiency standpoint, it's unquestionably a really good thing. Maybe you could say at some point we have too many cars, period. But so not question. It is a good. I will say it's a good thing. Questionably a good thing. How about that? But the question of the economic system hasn't actually been worked out, and that's sort of our larger challenge to it. So I don't know if we've solved it.
Well, speaking of the economic, I have a question. That guy with Douglas Rushkoff that wrote the book, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus and How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity. I assume you're familiar with him and that. And what is your thought? Is he on the right track, or is he on the wrong? I mean, he says the framework of our financial system is like a very, very old, antiquated operating system that with all the innovation here, we seem to accept it without questioning. So the question I have for you is, given that context, your company, you said you have investors, is it still the same old OS where they want growth and profit and all that, and how have you monetized that, or is there any way to change that paradigm? It seems very daunting it seems when I listen to Rushkoff and see him talk, I can see how it could be a better way for all of us, but getting to politics and just sort of our paradigm that we don't look at or question, it's almost daunting. How do you take that first single step of the 1,000-mile journey? Do you have any ideas of that?
Well, I appreciate you raising the question. Best I can tell is you just try. That's all been my strategy has been. And with Yerdle, we had this sort of idea let's have people share things for free, and that'll be good, which sounds kind of stupid as I think about it. And somehow people were willing to fund it. We set ourselves as a California Benefit Corp. And this was basically the same year that the law was started. So we were the first venture-backed company in this. And because there was enough heat at the initial point, we got them over that point, which was great, the VCs, all of whom were socially aligned to us. But the nature of venture capital is it seeks returns, and seeks returns in a 10-year horizon or less. So growth is required, particularly at a consumer-oriented internet company. So that's just the rules of the game. And to my mind, you're sort of saying, I have that somewhat constraint, but the benefit is I have capital to go do this crazy thing and try it. And for us, over a period of time, we found our market, we found a business model, and I think we're doing something that's very positive for the planet in that place. So that sort of works out. But there definitely are inherent conflicts that come from that. And I think that in some places, so for example, we've been invited to help several city efforts in China. I actually hope that those are run by the government, because I think they could actually do a pretty good job in some of them. There are places where it may not be the capital markets that solve it, it might be government. So there could be other solutions. There could be co-ops that work really well. That's not what I would suggest in China, but in other places. So there are different models to it. I personally love the venture capital model as a particularly for an incubator for new things, because it's really hard to raise capital for something that seems so stupid unless you have venture capitalists behind you and they're willing to do crazy things.
I'm curious about what you're currently doing in politics and a little bit about your transition from business to political sphere.
So I've sort of been all over the place, and I was sort of sharing to Julie that one thing I've sort of learned is that you pick the media based on the time. So I was thinking of this other period in 2004, John Kerry was running for president, and I worked with a bunch of folks like Van Jones and a few others to create this thing called the Apollo Project, which was this plan for a $300 billion massive clean energy investment. We handed it to him and was like, run on this. And they were like, no, we can't do it because the deficit's too important. No one will ever spend $300 billion. We thought we had totally failed. We'd spent a huge amount of time getting all these labor unions, all civil rights groups and environmental groups. We had all this sort of great solution, and it just sort of died. But then 4 years later, Obama took that exact plan and implemented it. So sometimes you kind of create these sort of moments in downtimes that seem sort of hard and they get picked up later. So that's where I'm hoping we're at right now. So I started a new organization with Reid Hoffman, who's one of the founders of LinkedIn, and Mark Pincus, who started Zynga in Farmville, called WTF, or Win the Future. And the idea is to basically begin to crowdsource new ideas for political change, instead of kind of assuming that the political status quo is going to just fix itself, to basically try to find other ways to change things. So we just got back from Virginia, where we did a lot of work behind candidates there, and found, as I was sharing with Julia, that the most exciting thing is that there's all these new candidates and new people like went on the Women's March and decided to run for office. And there's a lot of enthusiasm on the ground, but the tools to actually help them win don't exist, or what does exist is really terrible. So for example, I was on a college campus, and the best political tools that existed required you to have a laptop and an email address, and none of the students who were there had a laptop or ever used email. And that's just sort of the nature of sort of this sort of missing between like what the political world talks in and where the rest of the world is. So it's a little brief. I can share more with you later too. Please.
Hi. Thanks for the great talk. And actually, during your speech, I have some thoughts going through my mind, and I suddenly remembered one of the books I've read before. It's called Necessity by Kevin Kelly. I don't know if you have.
I don't know that book though.
Okay, so inside of the book, he described like 12 powers that will change the future. One of them is called sharing, and that's just like you. Yeah. Inside of it, he described something like a closet that you can like sort of take off your old clothes and put inside, and every morning it will be like brand new. And this sort of like sharing. I don't know if Yerdle will do something like that in the future, or we'll stick to this sort of like Amazon, or you can go to a website and order the used clothes. And also I'm wondering about the quality of the products from Yerdle, because one of the humans' nature is they love new stuff better than old stuff. I don't know, because sometimes in the second-hand market you will have the lemon market stuff. I don't know how to handle this.
Those are great questions. So the first question you asked is sort of services as opposed to just selling things. I'm super interested in that, and the idea of subscribing. There are some test pilots of things that not that we're doing that are out there that I'm really excited about. Nike has a shoe subscription service right now at their kids shoe subscription service. There's a bunch of things that are testing. Nothing has really gotten to scale or worked, at least in the consumer level. At a corporate level, absolutely. From carpet on, people are used to buying things and services, but at the consumer level, very rarely. The best example, though, is this. Like, I don't know, like the Apple iPhone upgrade program is just perfect. It really is. It's sort of they are demonstrating that with finance and warranties, you can have people never need to own and have the best available technology, which is super exciting. And every phone that you pass down is getting used. It's not like it's being thrown away. It will be used over and over again. So it's sort of a perfect. I think it's sort of the best program in the world. What was the other question you asked? I apologize. Quality. Yeah. Yes, there's another, in studying the psychological research, there's another thing else that's called neophilia, which is this need to always have the next new thing, which Americans in particular suffer from, but it's not us alone. It's China, it's Brazil, it's Argentina, and there are countries that are known for the highest indication of this. So there are people who would never buy anything that's not new. There are countries that we track where when an apartment sells the first time, it's like a car, it's worth 30% less after it's new, which seems sort of crazy because we're used to housing being that way, but cars, once they're not new, people don't want them and their value goes way down. So it's sort of a similar point. What we found with certain things is that this idea of warranty, lifetime warranty, so that's one of the joys of working with Patagonia, for example, everything that we sell used has a lifetime warranty. That helps people a lot feel better. And the price queue, right? So Patagonia stuff is it's expensive, and used is half the price. So that tends to get people over it pretty fast. So with Patagonia, we've actually sold out everything we've had consistently since April. So there's sort of no lack of demand for it. And the biggest challenge is actually to get people to bring it in, like let go of your stuff that you have, because we'll sell it no problem to people who would like it.
Sorry, just for clarification, you said people in America are more fan of new stuff instead of like China, Brazil, and
No, I was saying that China and Brazil are similar.
All are the same.
all the same.
Are very similar to that, yeah. India is not. India is actually one that's changing to some extent, but India in some ways has some of the best, that is sort of most willing to take things that have been used before.
We might have time for one more question, maybe.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Better be a good one, I don't know, it's a lot of pressure.
No, probably won't be,
No pressure.
that pressure. I was just gonna ask on the economics of
Yeah.
the Patagonia sort of used. So I think everyone can appreciate like people who are philosophically driven and a privately held company, it's much easier to do something like that. But at scale, you imagine like someone like a Walmart or just larger companies to be buying back and refurbing. Is that a profitable thing for them? And if so, like more profitable resource-wise than just making new stuff? So
yeah, my dream, and it would be fun to have Patagonia come here and talk about this, but my dream for them is that they really are not making anything new, or very, very few things, maybe 10% of what they're selling. That most of the things that are just out there in the world and they're remaking them and refixing them and getting the newest technology into them, but not doing that. And I think that's possible. The way the economics work right now, you take a jacket, we charge like a fee to actually clean it and get it ready, but not much, and then basically split the profit with them for reselling it. So it's all money for them. Like if you had a jacket in your, let's say you probably do have a Patagonia jacket in your closet that you're not using. That's not making them any money. They don't actually know who you are. If you take it off out of the closet, You bring it into a Patagonia store, you get a gift card. You probably at this point typed your name in, so they now have your email address. You have a gift card that is a Patagonia gift card, so you're going to buy something else at Patagonia. It's like there's a lot of good reasons to keep you as a lifetime customer to that brand. For you, you're getting money back, you're getting a new jacket, you're getting your warranty, you're getting a relationship. So it sort of works for everyone that way. But my experience is that, yeah, actually, for companies that make products that are durable and that are worth more than $30, it's even better when they're worth more than $50. Yes, absolutely. For companies that are making things that are kind of disposable, no. So this would be a very hard business model for H&M to do, because the cost of reclaiming a $3 t-shirt is way more than it would be to make another $3 t-shirt.
And can I just ask one quick follow-up on that? So that is, if they're offsetting new sales, like does Patagonia think about the impact or measure the impact of that, you know? So that to me would be where they really get hit, would be, so I don't buy any coat, right?
So it has been on our first sale day, we found that 80% of the people who bought were not known to Patagonia. So 80% of people were new customers who would like to have bought Patagonia but probably couldn't afford the price point. So for them, when they look at their brand and they go, oh, you know, our demographic is aging because it was launched a little while ago. It's expensive, so it sort of pushes it over. Like, this is a great way to get new customers and new younger customers too. So again, there's sort of all sorts of good reasons that happens for those. And we're seeing that. We just launched with REI, and they're kind of seeing similar stuff too. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
So much.
Good.
This was great. And thank you all. Let's give a hand.